An $8 mix you can make in your kitchen tonight reduces arterial inflammation, dissolves arterial plaque buildup, drops blood pressure by a clinically measurable margin, and cuts cardiovascular event risk in half, all before you wake up tomorrow morning. No statin, no blood thinner, no $300 monthly prescription with a liver damage warning buried in the fine print. Oxford University tracked this exact combination across 47,000 patients over 12 years. Ancient Ayurvedic physicians prescribed it to Indian kings for 5,000 years specifically to protect the heart. Mediterranean villages that have consumed this mix daily for generations have cardiovascular disease rates so low that American cardiologists fly there to study the population. A $50 billion statin industry buried this conversation the moment they realized you cannot patent a spice and you cannot bill insurance for a kitchen ingredient. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. Subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a vault. In 2004, the Interheart study published in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals on earth, tracked the causes of heart attacks across 52 countries involving over 29,000 patients. It remains the largest cardiovascular risk study ever conducted globally. Its findings identified 9 modifiable risk factors responsible for over 90% of all heart attack risk worldwide. Every single one of those 9 factors is directly addressed by specific compounds in this $8 mix, not partially addressed, not theoretically touched, directly, measurably, and documentably addressed in subsequent peer-reviewed research published in the same journals that every cardiologist in the country reads every month. The pharmaceutical industry read that study too. They read it and spent $50 billion in the years following, making absolutely certain that the conversation in cardiology focused on the synthetic interventions targeting those 9 factors rather than the natural compounds doing the same job through the same mechanisms for $8 at any grocery store. Here is the molecular reality, and it is not complicated once someone explains it honestly. Arterial inflammation is the foundational driver of cardiovascular disease, not cholesterol. Not fat. Inflammation. The cholesterol narrative was constructed in the 1960s by research substantially funded by the sugar industry to redirect scientific attention away from sugar's inflammatory role in cardiovascular disease. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented in a 2016 paper published in JAMA Internal Medicine that analyzed previously secret sugar industry documents proving that the Sugar Research Foundation paid Harvard scientists in 1967 to publish research specifically minimizing the link between sugar and heart disease while emphasizing the link between fat and heart disease. The entire low-fat dietary paradigm that dominated cardiology for 50 years and made the processed food industry $400 billion richer was purchased science, documented, published, indexed, taught in essentially 0 medical schools. The actual driver of cardiovascular disease is chronic arterial inflammation that damages the endothelial lining of blood vessels, creating rough surfaces where oxidized LDL particles accumulate, triggering immune responses that form the foam cells and fibrous caps that become arterial plaques, which narrow vessels, restrict blood flow, and eventually rupture catastrophically, causing heart attacks and strokes. Address the inflammation and you address the foundational mechanism. The compounds in this $8 mix address the inflammation through 4 separate independent pathways that no single statin drug touches because statin drugs do not address inflammation. They address cholesterol levels, and cholesterol levels are not the cause. They are one downstream marker of an inflammatory process whose upstream driver, the pharmaceutical industry, spent $50 billion making sure you would call a fat problem instead of an inflammation problem. Travel back to ancient India 3000 BC, where Ayurvedic physicians serving the royal courts maintained the most sophisticated cardiovascular medicine of the ancient world. The Karaka Samhita, the foundational Ayurvedic medical text compiled around 400 BC, but encoding knowledge thousands of years older, contains detailed prescriptions for what the text calls Shridaya Roga, diseases of the heart, that read like a pre-molecular description of cardiovascular inflammation management with stunning precision. The primary cardiac protection formula prescribed in the Karaka Samhita for daily preventive use combined turmeric root, specifically the compound now identified as curcumin, with ginger root, raw garlic, and black pepper dissolved in warm liquid consumed in the evening. These 4 ingredients, this exact combination, prescribed for 5,000 years to kings who could not afford to have heart attacks, and the populations that have maintained these dietary traditions continuously, rural Indian communities consuming turmeric, garlic, and ginger daily as fundamental dietary staples have cardiovascular disease rates 60 to 70% lower than comparable Western populations consuming equivalent caloric loads with equivalent sedentary lifestyles. The difference is not genetics. The difference is documented in the dietary records. The difference is these 4 compounds consumed daily over a lifetime. The ancient Greeks knew a version of this truth independently. Dioscorides, the Greek physician whose pharmacological text Materia Medica served as the foundational medical reference for 15 centuries across Europe and the Arab world, documented garlic specifically as a compound that cleans the arteries and maintains the suppleness of the blood vessels with age. He was describing endothelial function and arterial elasticity in premolecular language 2,000 years before the first angiogram was performed. He observed the clinical outcome in hundreds of patients and recorded it precisely. The molecular biology arrived 2 millennia later and confirmed that allicin, the primary active compound in garlic, inhibits platelet aggregation, reduces arterial inflammation markers, and improves endothelial nitric oxide production through mechanisms that directly support every dimension of vascular health that Dioscorides described without knowing a single molecule by name. The Mediterranean populations, whose cardiovascular health draws researchers from around the world, are not mysterious. They are not genetically special. They consume olive oil, garlic, turmeric in curry-adjacent spice traditions, raw ginger, and raw honey as fundamental daily dietary staples that have been continuous in their food culture for thousands of years. Their arteries at 70 look like the arteries of Western 45-year-olds under imaging. Their cardiovascular event rates are so low that epidemiologists initially questioned the data. The data was correct. The diet is the mechanism, and the diet costs $8 at any grocery store, which is precisely why the $50 billion statin industry needs you to believe that cardiovascular protection requires a prescription. The global statin market generates $14 billion in annual revenue. The broader cardiovascular pharmaceutical market, including antihypertensives, anticoagulants, antiplatelets, and cardiac procedure equipment, generates over $50 billion annually in the United States alone. The 5 largest cardiovascular pharmaceutical companies spent a combined $1.4 billion on lobbying and regulatory affairs between 2018 and 2023. Their combined investment in medical school cardiovascular curriculum development and cardiologist continuing education exceeds $900 million over the same period. A 2017 study published in JAMA Cardiology analyzed the conflict of interest disclosures of every cardiologist who served on the committees writing American Heart Association dietary guidelines between 2001 and 2017. Over 58% of those committee members held active financial relationships with pharmaceutical or food industry companies with direct commercial interests in the guidelines those committees were writing. The guidelines those committees produced consistently recommended pharmaceutical intervention as first-line treatment for elevated cardiovascular risk factors. They consistently recommended against specific natural compound supplementation despite available peer-reviewed evidence. The financial relationships are disclosed, the pattern is documented, the conversation is not happening. The 2003 CHAOS trial published in The Lancet showed that natural vitamin E supplementation reduced non-fatal heart attacks by 77% in patients with confirmed coronary artery disease, 77%. From a $4 supplement. The trial was so dramatically positive that the researchers stopped it early on ethical grounds because they felt it was wrong to continue giving the placebo group the placebo when the results were that clear. The American Heart Association did not update its dietary guidelines to recommend vitamin E supplementation. The cardiovascular pharmaceutical industry increased statin marketing spend by $800 million in the year following that publication. Stay right here because the exact formula and the exact dosing goes deeper than the history alone. But first, everything in this video is barely the beginning of what was buried. Every validated natural cardiovascular compound, every suppressed clinical trial, every ancient protocol that cardiovascular pharmaceutical interests have spent decades keeping out of standard of care guidelines is inside the complete forbidden outdoor vault package. Dietary protocols that address arterial inflammation at the root, ancient heart protection formulas validated by modern cardiology, off-grid emergency cardiac support techniques, blood pressure management methods that outperformed pharmaceutical intervention in 3 separate randomized trials that received 0 mainstream coverage, over 10 complete documented guides, 0 filler. The link is in the description. Stay right here because the formula is what they truly cannot afford you to know. Here is exactly what to do, and write this down precisely because these ratios matter and this timing matters, and the reasons why will make complete sense by the time you finish reading them. Go to any grocery store and buy 5 things: 1 jar of raw organic turmeric powder, 1 piece of fresh ginger root, 1 bulb of fresh raw garlic, 1 bottle of cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, 1 jar of raw honey. Total cost at any store, $7 to $11. These 5 ingredients combined have more peer-reviewed cardiovascular clinical evidence behind them than the majority of supplements currently marketed with cardiology endorsements. The evening timing is not arbitrary, and it is not tradition for tradition's sake. It is biological strategy. Your body conducts the majority of its cellular repair, inflammatory resolution, and arterial tissue maintenance during deep sleep between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. The compounds in this formula require 45 to 90 minutes to reach peak plasma concentration after consumption. Drinking this mix 60 to 90 minutes before bed delivers peak active compound concentration to your arterial tissue precisely during the biological window when your body is most actively using those compounds for repair. You are timing the nutritional intervention to the biological maintenance cycle. This is not folk wisdom. This is chronobiology applied to nutritional medicine, and it is documented in a 2019 paper in the journal Nutrients, showing that curcumin bioavailability and anti-inflammatory activity is measurably higher when consumed in the evening versus morning in a crossover study design. The formula: 1 teaspoon of turmeric powder, half a teaspoon of freshly grated ginger root, 2 cloves of raw garlic crushed and allowed to rest for exactly 10 minutes after crushing before adding to anything, 1 tablespoon of cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil, 1 teaspoon of raw honey, a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. Mix into 10 ounces of warm water or warm almond milk if you prefer. Stir for 90 seconds until fully combined. Drink the complete glass 60 to 90 minutes before sleep. The 10-minute rest period for the crushed garlic is not optional, and most people who attempt garlic-based protocols without knowing this detail get a fraction of the cardiovascular benefit. When you crush or chop garlic, an enzyme called alliinase converts alliin into allicin, the primary cardiovascularly active compound in garlic. This conversion requires oxygen exposure and approximately 10 minutes to reach maximum allicin yield. Heat destroys alliinase. This means cooked garlic produces essentially no allicin. Whole uncrushed garlic produces essentially no allicin. Only raw garlic crushed and rested for 10 minutes before consumption delivers the full allicin load that the research studies showing cardiovascular benefit were using. This single detail explains why most people's attempts to use garlic for cardiovascular health produce disappointing results. They are cooking it or swallowing it whole and delivering essentially 0 active compound to their arteries. Now, here is exactly what each compound is doing inside your cardiovascular system and why the combination is multiplicative rather than simply additive. Curcumin from the turmeric powder is the most extensively studied natural anti-inflammatory compound in the peer-reviewed literature, with over 12,000 published studies indexed in PubMed as of 2024. Its primary cardiovascular mechanism is inhibition of NF-κB, the same master inflammatory switch that drives chronic arterial inflammation through direct binding to the IKKV enzyme that activates NF-κB signaling. A 2012 meta-analysis published in Nutrition Journal analyzed 9 randomized controlled trials of curcumin supplementation and found statistically significant reductions in C-reactive protein, the primary blood marker of systemic inflammation and cardiovascular risk, across all 9 trials. Additionally, curcumin improves endothelial function, the ability of blood vessel walls to produce nitric oxide and regulate vascular tone, with a 2012 study in Nutrition Research finding that curcumin supplementation improved endothelial function as effectively as aerobic exercise in postmenopausal women. The black pepper is not flavoring, and it is not optional. Curcumin has notoriously poor bioavailability in isolation, meaning it is rapidly metabolized before it can reach systemic circulation in meaningful concentrations. Piperine, the active compound in black pepper, inhibits the liver enzymes and intestinal proteins responsible for that rapid metabolism, increasing curcumin bioavailability by 2,000%, not 20%, 2,000%. This is documented in a 1998 study published in Planta Medica that has been replicated multiple times since. Without the black pepper, you are absorbing roughly 2% of the curcumin you consume. With a quarter teaspoon of black pepper, you are absorbing close to the full therapeutic dose. Every curcumin study showing significant cardiovascular benefit used preparations with piperine included. The supplement industry sells plain curcumin capsules without piperine at $30 per bottle because the piperine formulation is harder to patent and harder to margin. The plain capsules produce measurably inferior results. You now know why. The allicin from your 10-minute rested crushed garlic operates through 3 simultaneous cardiovascular pathways. It inhibits platelet aggregation, the clumping of blood platelets that forms the initial thrombus in a heart attack or stroke, through inhibition of thromboxane A2 synthesis. It reduces arterial wall oxidative stress by increasing production of the endogenous antioxidant glutathione in vascular smooth muscle cells. And it directly inhibits HMG-CoA reductase, the exact same enzyme that statin drugs inhibit, reducing endogenous cholesterol synthesis through the same molecular target as the $14 billion annual statin market, through a natural binding mechanism that does not produce the muscle damage, liver stress, and CoQ10 depletion that the FDA requires statin manufacturers to list as known adverse effects. 3 pathways. Same enzyme target as the leading pharmaceutical class. 0 statin side effects. The olive oil delivers oleocanthal, a phenolic compound whose anti-inflammatory mechanism was documented in a landmark 2005 paper in Nature that described it as functioning identically to ibuprofen at the molecular level, inhibiting the same COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes through the same binding mechanism. The paper's title was an editorial decision that pharmaceutical companies fought against. The original title contained the phrase "a natural COX inhibitor." The anti-inflammatory dose of olive oil oleocanthal corresponds to approximately 1 to 2 tablespoons of high-quality cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil daily. The olive oil simultaneously improves the absorption of curcumin and allicin because both are fat-soluble compounds that require dietary fat for optimal intestinal absorption. It is doing double duty in the formula, delivering its own anti-inflammatory compound while simultaneously functioning as the delivery vehicle that makes the other compounds bioavailable. The ginger delivers gingerols that independently inhibit platelet aggregation through a different pathway than the garlic allicin, creating a compounding antiplatelet effect without the bleeding risk associated with pharmaceutical anticoagulants. A 2015 meta-analysis in Nutrition Journal analyzing 8 randomized controlled trials found that ginger supplementation produced statistically significant reductions in fasting blood glucose, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides across all 8 trials. The raw honey delivers quercetin and kaempferol, flavonoid compounds documented in a 2016 meta-analysis in the British Journal of Nutrition to be associated with a 14% reduction in cardiovascular mortality across 12 prospective studies involving over 800,000 participants.